All right, thanks, Karen. My name is John Shaw. I'm Director of Product Engineering at Kionix. Just a little bit of the background. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is this good?
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit of background for the talk. Karen approached us and wanted us to present here. She said the theme of the symposium was that the MEMS ecosystem had evolved to the point where we could, companies could start and go the fabless route. And I said, it's not quite the way I would look at things right now. And that'd be ideal, but it'd be ideal, but I don't think we're there yet. And I politely declined, and she sensed a moment to grab some controversial comments, and which makes for a better symposium. And so she asked me to give my perspective. And so here I am trying to make the case for the captive fab. The benefits, I think, hopefully will convey well. So just a little bit of a background on Kionix for those of you who aren't familiar with us. And so you know where, from a context standpoint, where we're coming from. It's about 20 years old. It's a MEMS company that makes inertial sensors. It was founded using some technology that came out of Cornell University. And we've become one of the top MEMS manufacturers of accelerometers. And are currently looking into other markets to expand, such as gyroscopes and magnetometers. We're in a host of devices from tablets and smartphones to game systems, PCs, hard drives, and we have our own foundry. We design and produce our own MEMS in-house at Ithaca, and we also test our MEMS. And we do our own. We don't do our own packaging. We have that done in the foundry, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And I should just make a point to say that we are part of Rome Inc., which is a big sponsor for this expo. Now, personally, I've been in MEMS also for about 20 years. I actually went to Cornell. And through my career, I've worked in a number of areas in other companies where we've done both low volume, high cost products. So in one company we were making, I think it was about 8 die per wafer. So very large structures, expensive to produce, very low volumes, very niche. And also high volume, low cost, and that's where I'm at right now with Kionix. We've worked with foundries, we've used foundries, we still do. Wow, this thing's excited. We've done some foundry work, and in some situations in the life cycle of the companies I've been, they've been a foundry and functioned as one. So, as I said, I'm at Kionix now, and it really went from being a two-person company, working out of a university lab, to being a top MEMS manufacturer with hundreds of millions of units per year being produced. And from that experience, owning and running a fab can be expensive, can take a lot of effort, but I think it's been fundamental to the success that we've seen. So, this is kind of the crux of my position, it's that it really, just from a general sense, is important to own that what makes your product or your process unique. And this will get to some of the standardization that Karen talked about earlier. It's also very important to take ownership of the things that are critical to your product's commercial success. So even if it's not unique, if it's something that you can't get done easily someplace else, it's important to have possession of that. So I know in the MEMS industry group, there's a lot of people trying to get to the fabless model, and my fear is that it may sound a little bit like a dissing or a bashing of them, and that's not the case, because I do feel like they do serve a purpose. Certainly the shared cost benefit is a big one, because fabs are expensive. And they're good for trying out ideas, and Kionix actually does use foundries for this purpose, because you don't want to go investing in something that you may or may not end up using. And they're critical for those startups or those companies who really have no possibility of a captive fab. But my position is, or at least my experience, my perspective, is that it's not the best for when you really need to commercialize a product in a highly competitive industry. And I think There may be some people who are familiar with examples, and I don't dispute that. They can be done, and examples do exist. But what I'm saying is we're not there yet, and we've got a long road ahead of us if it's going to get to that point. So one other clarification before I delve into some of the specifics of my perspective is that I think that there's a whole spectrum for the foundry model. And what I'm going to be contrasting the captive fab against is the top one, the IC model. And that's the model where, like CMOS, you just go shopping around for a process. You want to have something made, and you have a number of processes available to you. You choose it, you license it, and then you can have your design manufactured. In that situation, the foundry often shares equipment and workers amongst a bunch of other companies and products. So that's the one I'm going to be contrasting against. Now, at the other end of the model is at the other end of the spectrum is the dedicated model. In this situation, you may have a portion of a foundry dedicated to your product or your company, maybe a dedicated team, and sometimes an entire fab is dedicated. In that situation, that's a lot closer to a captive fab, and that is a lot more workable, I think, in today's situation. But you certainly have to have the volumes and the leverage to have that opportunity available to you. And then in the middle is, of course, a hybrid model. And in this model, you might have some of the more common standardized processes being done in a foundry, and then you save the more unique or the special spot process steps for doing in-house. But I think from a commercialization standpoint, that's good for trying things out, but it's fraught with integration issues. So the advantages of the captive fab, I think it boils down to the state that the industry and the technology is at right now, and it's that it's not yet mature enough to support that. And that's because the process parameters in the fab and how they relate to the structure, and then how that structure changes and the specifics of the structure relates to the performance are nowhere near as well developed as in the IC industry. I mean, there is an incredible amount of information and knowledge in the IC industry about the MOSFET, the transistor, and all the small changes in the physical structure, how that'll play out, how to tune the tools to get it. But that's not the case with MEMS yet. And so the processes are really nuanced. And so small shifts can really make a big difference on the performance or the reliability of your part. I was almost afraid that Karen was going to preempt my whole talk because this is a critical part of the argument, and that's that there's no standard processes or building blocks either. In CMOS, you can piece together a circuit from parts, but for MEMS, you're not going to say I want an accelerometer, I'm going to put it here and a gyro here, or even the smaller pieces. You're not going to say I want a bump stop here and a cone finger here. And so what you're tasked to do is to develop your own building blocks. And then once you do, the design and the fab are really tightly linked, and they really can't be decoupled. Now, our ASIC designers can sit there and they can design an ASIC without really needing to know what's happening in the lab, in the fab, when it's made. But that's not the case with MEMS. There's definitely a real tight link, and that's also shows up in the fact that the design and simulation tools aren't there. There are companies out there trying to bring that level of sophistication, but if you're not trying to do exactly what that piece of software was designed to do, it doesn't reach the accuracy of what you'll end up getting. And so you're going to, again, have a lot of trial and error in the lab. So because of those two things, my position is that the process itself, the fabrication process, has huge value. It can enable and constrain what you can do and what's manufacturable, and that the product success really is typically not design alone, but the interplay between the design and the process. Now, if the process is really valuable, there are some concerns that we or other companies might make if you're going to get that process done in another facility. Because foundries are about sharing costs, but the problem is that it's a human endeavor and information flows as well. And then even if they have the best intentions, there's a concern that process flows or tuning or the secret sauce, basically, if you make a real advance, that it may not be as safe if it's not under your own roof. And so having the captive fab pretty much eliminates that concern. In addition to that control of the information, even more importantly, I think, is the possession of that information. If the foundry is, versus a captive fab, is the one that is solving some of these integration issues or figuring out exactly how to make it work, that's a critical element to your success or your development of your product. You really want that not to reside within your own company. And you can have things documented as well, but there's only a certain level of documentation that can be done. Now, time to market is another critical aspect of commercial success. It can make a difference between being successful and not. And so you want to take every opportunity you can to slice the time off of developing a product. With a captive fab, you can have the engineers and the fab people in the same room, in the same hallway, and really make use of all the efficiencies of having them co-located. Now, the alternative of having it done someplace else, obviously, is inefficiencies of remote operation. And then there's another level, if you're talking about having to work with it across time zones and language or cultural barriers. So, from a time-to-market standpoint, having your own fab in-house has been critical. Lastly, resource prioritization is a big issue too. When you need some changes or some increased priority or something done, you're always competing with what other customers are sharing that line. And again, with the captive fab, the guy on top makes the decisions and puts down the hammer, and people will focus and fall in line, and it's a lot easier to get that prioritization. There's always the business uncertainty aspect as well. So you build up something internally, and you really start to control your own destiny. If you're having it outsourced, you do have to be concerned that some issues outside of your control could occur. For the smaller foundries, they could be bought. It could go out of business. And for the smaller and the larger foundries, they could change their business model and feel that what service they're providing to you doesn't fit. And lastly, and this is critical again in a very highly competitive industry, costs are extremely important, and when you have it under your same roof, you're able to control those costs and to make the decisions that provide the most control. So lastly, and this is kind of when everything goes right and everything goes according to plan, I don't think you have any issues at all. But yes, I mean, how often does that happen? So when you do need changes, and this is a biggie as well, is how easy is it to get something accomplished in your own fab versus a foundry? MEMS uses a lot of materials, and say you need to introduce a new material. Fab processes are very sensitive to contamination, and it may be a no-go, or it may be a long negotiation to try something out or to change material. So when you're developing a product, having that freedom to make that choice is important. Tool sets and screening. MEMS uses specific tools, has special processes, and we've had the experience on a number of occasions where things didn't go according to plan and we had to make adjustments. And that adjustment might be purchasing another tool to fix something or to address something that new that we learned, or putting new processes in place. But in the CMOS model of a foundry, the process is established and you use, and it's standardized, and it's very difficult to get changes in. And lastly, capacity. If the foundry doesn't have spare, if it does have spare capacity, no problem. But if it doesn't, then what you're trying to do is you're trying to steal capacity from somebody else. And so again, it's a negotiation. Now, this is at the end, but it's been huge in our experience because the demands fluctuate wildly when you're dealing in high volumes. And it's been a very vital part to us winning some of the opportunities that we had in the past. We've needed to scale up our lines in a way that I don't think would have been possible without it being under our complete control. So that's essentially the reasons that I think it's important. But just to counterbalance my own argument, where I do feel like the foundry services do work is when the design really is the value added. And the processing, it offers no competitive advantage. And that's true, for example, we outsource our packaging, putting the MEMS and the ASIC together and putting plastic around it and having a final part. And that's because we don't feel like there's value added there that we can give. And it does have to have some commonality with other manufacturers in the industry. And so it just makes sense for us to outsource that aspect of it. The concern over the trade secrets or the intellectual property, if you've got things locked up very tightly, then that's less of a concern. And finally, if you're not actually really trying to push the limits of what the process can do, and you're working well within the framework, then it's also not as big a deal because it's less likely that you'll come to the situation where you do need changes in the fundamental aspects of the process. So, I softened my view as I started to develop this talk, and I do believe it will have its day someday. It's just not today, and it's not for a while. And what will need to happen is the processes will need to converge. The standardization will have to happen. But I think that one of the things that would make me put my bets on there being increased use of the fabless model is that the fab companies out there, especially the ones who've made incredible investments in the CMOS industry, might have aging fabs which are not as competitive in that industry, but can be very competitive in the MEMS industry. And so that's really, I think, going to drive down costs and give that some support. And once we do get to that point, I think that what you'll see is somewhat a segmentation of processes. Because MEMS is incredibly diverse and it's just one word to cover a lot of different things. But the variety of sensing and actuation mechanisms are large. And if you try to shoehorn that into a generalized process, then you're going to be giving up some performance. So what you might see is segmentation of processes. So this fab or this line or this process specializes in inertial sensors because that's a mass-related market, and so it might require similar approaches to processing. Maybe a different one would be for energy harvesting or optics or resonators and so on. So this is kind of just plugged in there, but I put this in there kind of as a word of advice because I thought this was the one piece of advice I could share if someone was going to go the foundry route. And that's, if possible, have employees on site, because that will address almost all of the, or many of the advantages of the captive fab without necessarily the cost. The people there will have the drive to make your product work on that line and to address issues when they arise. They'll be better able to work within the system. So when you are competing for resources, they'll be there with its eyes on the ground and they'll be able to utilize relationships. And most importantly, they'll be there to see that the IP is protected, and they'll have they'll be able to absorb and capture that special process knowledge. So, to summarize, the technical challenges when you're developing MEMS, developing a new process, having a captive fab where the design and process are closely linked is important. It's certainly the faster way to develop it. You don't have to worry as much about the IP and the trade secrets, and you take control of your own destiny. And lastly, it gives you tremendous flexibility and adaptability. So in theory, I think that the fabless is great because it lets you focus on design. But with the state of the industry right now, I think in practice, no matter what, even if you go the foundry route, you'll find yourself drawn into the process and the intricacies of that. So, go a little faster than I thought.
We have some time now for Q&A. All right.
Can you give us an idea of the cost of a MEMS factory to build an accelerometer? And is it easy to get venture capital for a MEMS fab these days?
Probably not these days. I would say, it varies. I mean, the Kionix had started out with one tool and doing the hybrid model and then continually growing up until they had the whole fab. And now we're expanding with fabs other places. I would have to say you're certainly in the tens of millions to even have a basic process. And so, yes, it is challenging, and I don't think you'll find somebody to write a check right away to do it. But depending on your process, and we're also concerned with capacity, and so, again, you won't, as a starting company, probably need to buy as much equipment as we do.
One comment and then one question.
Sure.
Do you mean we had the MEMS every year?
Yeah.
The event that our event. In case of a project, we have to go to that.
Okay.
And the last one was in Taiwan. In April, I guess. And we discussed the MEMS ecosystem as well as the utility of the stepless MEMS solutions and TSMC involved. And what is your opinion? TSMC opinion was you must have no own products if you are MEMS office. Is right or do you agree with?
Because of concern with conflict of interest, is that the premise of their statement?
Do you agree with this? That means if you have one product, you can offer your line for a MEMS certificate for us.
I mean, it certainly gives other companies wanting to use your foundry services less concern. I know Intel is opening up their lines, but I don't think they're allowing products in there that would compete with what they're doing. From opening up, I don't know. I mean, if people wanted to make something that competed with us in our own fab, that might be good for us, but I don't, in the past when we've been approached, we've tried it a couple of times doing some small projects, but it really wasn't our core business, and so we really didn't feel like we were committed to it. So as a manufacturer trying to commercialize a product, we had to focus entirely on that, rather than, it's a completely different model, I think, when you want to be a foundry, because you have to be a lot more open and supportive, and it's just completely different, I think. So from our perspective, our philosophy, we would not really feel like it's worth our time.
The good news is, I can say, John, we're going to talk about this topic real soon, so we'll have a chance, Peter from Silence will be able to chance. So David Harris in the back.
Yeah, just, in your comparison of captive versus, foundry options. I mean, doesn't it, actually 2 points. One, doesn't it really come down to the partnership that you have if you choose to go with a, partner foundry? That was my first question.
Absolutely, and that's where I was saying almost like the dedicated model. If you basically are having something dedicated to you, that's somebody else is carrying, some of the capital costs, but you have a lot of the benefits because it's a one-to-one.
Right. And then doesn't it ultimately come down to the actual business? I mean, in the case of Kionix, you're running a very high volume, focused product line, very specialized,
Right.
all the way through testing.
Yep.
Where I can see why for maybe Kionix it makes sense for your particular business to have a captive fab. But for others, I come
It
from
is
the foundry
challenging. If
side.
somebody gave you $20 million, would you use that money for something else and get stuff made at a foundry, or would you invest in your own fab? Which is a tough question, I think.
It comes down to the business
All right.
and the market.
I'm going to moderators, I'm going to go to Jim Kennedy, because I know that you have, and then I'm going to.
Actually, I just-
Is this a separate question? And then, okay, yeah, we're done. Jim.
I just wanted to comment on the whole aspect of where the value added is coming from. And that's really what determines, at least in our experience, what determines the way to go. And I can tell you, my last company, we ran both. We sold standard products, we sold fab capacity, we sold the whole thing. And the whole idea was we were very open about it. And in some cases, we did have an issue where we could not win. But in most cases, we were adding a value and we were partnering with whoever, at whatever level we went into. That's really the whole key is it the design that's competitive, is it the manufacturing that's competitive, or is it the customer interface that's competitive?
Right. It's exactly what John said. Peter, final comment? Okay. Can you stand up?
Sure. So, first off, maybe we'll talk about this more later, but, the captain tab for your own in-house staff, all have great advantages.
Sure.
It's a catch-22, right? You have to get to high volume or justify that kind of a commitment.
Right.
And 40 down to 15 and 5 that is.
Right.
That's kind of where the foundry model kind of plays into play.
But I mean, in a way, why don't they get it too? I mean, did they try that route? I mean, it wasn't, it was a long, hard slog in our case. And I think we were lucky also that the market was there. We weren't trying to make the market when it happened. Like any, early stage company, it just takes one or two to make the difference between being successful or not. To give you that bootstrap up to the point where you have some side.
PCs are not funding that.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And then just on the pure play versus products, foundry side, or pure play, we don't fit any product side. For us, it's really critical because the MEMS development cycle is so long, it could be 2-3 years. That the guys that are trying to displace market leaders, they don't want people to know what they're working on.
Okay.
They need that kind of confidence.
So when you say pure play versus product, you mean you're not producing anything, you're only providing services, yeah. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And now you've been so patient, thank you.
Urgent Seven Fires or the other issues. Nice talk. I think it's really good to hear all the different viewpoints. I have a similar background to yours where I used to work for a company where we were with oil and gas and we had the deep pockets and we didn't have a product out there by integrating into our product. So we built a 6-inch fab. It became a 5 MEMS and then it got bought over Libris. But at the end of the day, I see a lot of what you were talking about, but your business model is very cyclical. It really, you really want to look at a fabless model. That was one point that was not there in the last line. I think it had a lot to do with the design IP. Where is it designed?
Right.
Where is the value coming in? But when you have a very cyclical model, you may want to invest in the NRE with a fabless model.
Right.
And establish kind of like a dedicated model like you talked about.
And even in foundries, I think it's challenging. I mean, you won't get, I don't have a lot of experience, so I'm not talking from the foundry perspective a lot. And it's not meant to say that, it's not the way to go. But I did do a little bit of informal research by talking to some colleagues that, have used it. And, there are certainly challenges. And unless you're going to a foundry with large volumes, you're not going to get preferred treatment there. And, you're going to probably pay a little bit, definitely pay more than somebody with huge volumes at a foundry. And so I think there's a little bit of a catch-22 there too. Even though you got no choice but to go to the foundry, you would get much better results if, you were putting down, thousands of wafers in a year. And
That's why I learned things that we invested on, I think it was $50 or $70 million.
Yep.
Hindsight,
Yeah.
we might have wanted to have a dual source capital model so that we can cover a lot of the risk.
Yeah.
But you invest enough money into the fabs
Yep.
address a lot of these questions. So, let's keep this conversation going, because there's no one solution, there's no one silver bullet, and that's part of this diversification, and why, it's great to have these kinds of forums for discussion, so that people who are new to the industry can help navigate this, right? So that we have a solution that Kionix has successfully done. I mean, you guys are here, successful 20 years in the making, and then you have a success story like Analog Devices, right? So you each have your model. ST has its story. You're going to tell your story for success, right? So you should not speak for fabless companies, because you can't, right? And that's not what you're here to. So it's sort of unfair to have you speak about that. You've done a great job, and I hope you'll come back and speak again, so we haven't scared you too much. Thank you very much.